Welcome to Behind the Music, the Houston Chamber Choir's weekly podcast. I'm St. John Flynn. This time, it's a great pleasure to be able to introduce classical guitarist Marc Garvin, a frequent collaborator with the Houston Chamber Choir. Marc, welcome. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you, St. John. It's great to see you. It's great to be here. And of course, great to be collaborating again with the Houston Chamber Choir.
Do you remember the first time that you performed with the choir?
It's gotta be about 12 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. And I was accompanying a few singers and accompanying the choir as a whole. I remember it being a wonderful collaboration, played a solo or two in addition at the Villa des Mattel. And so I've always had an affinity for them and have seen them whenever I could, gone and heard them since then. And of course, tracked the Grammy in 2019, which is just so wonderful. I love the video of Marianne and Bob at the Grammys. And
the Grammy goes to Durflay.
Marianne's just beaming with joy and delight and the pride in her eyes. It's just I've shown that to a lot of people and said, I know these people, I've played with them, and look at them, there they are at the Grammys. And I got my picture with the Grammy the other day also. I'm just like so.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, talk a little bit about this, the upcoming virtual concert. It's titled A Time to Journey Inward. That's the title of the performance. What is your role in this?
Well, playing this Whitbourne piece, Solitude, and I'm accompanying
James
the choir.
Whitbourne.
James Whitbourne, yeah. I'm accompanying the group, just me and the group. And it's beautiful music. And he was pretty familiar with the guitar. And that's not always true of a lot of composers. You can tell by the way they write, like, I've got to grow another finger to be able to do this. And that was not the case with Whitbourne's music, He knew what he was doing. And some raschiato effects, some strumming, flamenco type strumming a little bit. And they're just appropriate in the right spot. The use of harmonics on the guitar as well. And he does a really good job of creating really quiet, powerful sections in the music, and then really loud sections where it's pretty well balanced with the guitar, which is another trick in and of itself, because the classical guitar is so soft, and then lets the guitar play by itself in times and lets the choir sing by themselves, and then brings the two together. It's well composed and well arranged. And
I understand that in that Whitbourne piece, you mentioned the harmonics, and he does ask you to do some complicated stuff with the harmonics. Explain what harmonics are.
Oh, yeah. So typically on a guitar, you've got your bridge and you've got your nut. And when you play a string like that, it vibrates as a whole string, one unit. But if you touch it here, it's now going to vibrate between the fret and the bridge. But if I take my finger and just lightly touch it right there, it creates a node point. In other words, allows the string to vibrate now in two equal parts. There. Now 3 equal parts. Here at a third of the way up the neck. Now, if what I'm telling you is true, it should give me the same sound if I do another third up here. And then you keep dividing the string up. 4 equal parts. Here's a fourth, another fourth. Well, this is halfway again. Creating an octave. And then here's the other one. And you can, of course, keep going. And they get a little weaker as they go. And then what Whitbourne did was made the use of artificial harmonics as well, meaning I'm touching here and then touching halfway between there and the bridge, with my finger and plucking with my ring finger.
Oh, wow.
So you can play melodies like that, you know? Yeah. So
what's interesting is that it sort of extends the range, but it has a different timbre as well, doesn't it?
yes, gives it a bell-like quality to it that creates a whole other eerie kind of sound sometimes if used well with chords. In addition, and Whitmore does that sort of thing. I don't want to give away all our tricks, but but come to the concert and you'll hear it. Yeah.
So what's it like, though, for you as a classical guitarist? You mentioned that the classical guitar is a softer instrument because it's not amplified. Generally speaking, it's not amplified. So when you're playing with a chamber choir, you've got 24 voices. What's that interaction like? Do you have to do anything differently?
Tricky, depending. You know, when you're live with a chamber choir, there has been times when I've been microphoned lightly. Now the issues get to be that the more you microphone, the more the quality of the instrument you start to take away. At times, and it's tricky to do it just right. So a little bit of a light amplification can be useful. In addition, having a place like, say, the Villa des Mattel, or a really live, good acoustic type of environment, and the guitar can ring out. There's not a lot of music for guitar and choir, but there are some. One of the other main pieces that I've played before, not with the Houston Chamber Choir, but with a few other groups, is the Tedesco Romancero Gitano, which is a beautiful work and well done as well. So it's another example of guitar and choir that is a little bit, gets a little bit more play. So,
I have to ask, you mentioned that the chamber choir won the Grammy last year. So when you come to play with them now,
it's a little more pressure.
Were you thinking, I've got to up my game?
Yes. Yes, exactly. And outside of that, even before that, they were always outstanding anyway. And so whenever I've come to play with them, I've always made sure I'm at the top of my game.
What's it like seeing the choir in rehearsal? When you know, as we used to say when I worked in radio, when you see how the sausage is made. Oh
yeah. It's enlightening because rehearsals are not meant to be perfect. They're meant to perfect. Right. And so, I always, in my practicing, I'm thinking, okay, I've got to make this perfect. And by the time I arrive, it's got to be perfect. And then you arrive and you start, it's not perfect. And you make a mistake here and there and things like that. But that's the key is that there's room for creativity. There's room for, doing things a little differently, because what you're hearing at the time may be different than what you expected. Like a tempo might be a little different than what you expect. They may be louder than I expected, or softer, or I got to play a little louder, a little softer here, or, that warm sound that I created before, maybe that doesn't work. Maybe I need to be a little brighter. So you start making adjustments while you're rehearsing so that the performance comes out differently. Or on the guitar in particular, you start refingering things on the spot.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. I'll show you. So for instance, if I wanted to play a passage, say, and to be able to stand out over the group, but maybe that doesn't work at the time. Maybe I really want it. Or even a little different, and maybe I just want to create something a little different in the moment, realizing that this or that doesn't work. Or if you're like a recording and you suddenly realize, the harmonic way I played that doesn't really sound good, and I want to change something about that, make it warmer, make it brighter, make it something a little different, play it somewhere else on the guitar. Segovia used to call the guitar the little orchestra. And the reason he did that, Andre Segovia, our hero of the classical guitar in the 20th century, he had a lot of music written for the guitar. He was really into this idea of making the guitar sound different with each passage. So, never play the same phrase the same way twice. He'd say, so if you had something like, Villalobos, and maybe the next time you came around, maybe you just did a little brighter, if you can hear this on this. Can you hear that? Is that coming across? Etc. Yeah.
I think it's a sign of the times. We're so used to hearing our music digitally on CDs, on LPs, and we hear those tracks over and over again. And of course, they never change because it's a recording, and it's one take, and that's what is duplicated. And we've lost that sense of things being different every time they're played. Not that you necessarily attempt to make it different every time, but inevitably, that there will be differences. And we don't hear that with modern recordings. We just hear one version. And so that idea that, you can play it one time one way and another time a different way is sort of something that I think we can't wrap our minds around these days, because we've got the idea that it's like this, and this is how it will always be.
Right. And I think that's why, my teachers growing up in college, they insisted that we listen to live music. And because I think we get stuck on that's the way it's supposed to be played. I know I do. I hear a guitar recording of any classical guitar player, for instance, David Russell. I've been listening to a lot of him lately for some reason. He's really got my attention again. And he always plays so cleanly and so clearly, and his recordings are beautiful. And I think that that's the way it's supposed to go. So you go off and hear a different player play. That's not the way. I got to clear my mind of David Russell to be able to let in a newer player, a newer meaning a younger player that's, that I haven't heard before or something along that line. If we want to go there, there's a player named KUHF Park that I'm seeing a lot on YouTube. And she's fabulous. She's a South Korean guitar player, and she's bringing something different to the classical guitar world. And, it just requires it doesn't have to go the way it goes on the recording that I'm used to hearing, or, it can be different. So,
but that's what keeps the music alive. That's what keeps the music alive, isn't it?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Exactly.
So you're not always looking back, you're looking forward.
Right. Exactly.
Did you grow up in a musical family, Mark?
Actually not. My parents listened to some jazz standards, some of the popular music of their time. And we used to have a record player in the basement that played 45s and was that 75s, the big thing? And
33, the
33s,
LPs?
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Besides getting shocked on that thing on a regular basis, I used to go downstairs and listen to the records of some of their older recordings. And they had shows like Oklahoma and Showboat and all those things. And then they had a few jazz standards and things like that. And that was about the extent of the musical upbringing, more or less. But when I started taking an interest in music, I said I wanted to play guitar, and so they sent me for lessons.
Thank you, Mum and Dad.
Yeah, I'm grateful for that.
How did you come to the guitar?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, one day my brother brought home the Tommy album by The Who. And that sound was just, to me, was just spectacular. I couldn't get enough of that. And so now we had a stereo by that point. We'd grown into into a whole different modern technology. And I listened to that album over and over again. And all I could say was, I want to be able to play like that. And so at some point, I learned to play pretty much that whole album. And I was going for guitar lessons at the Jewish Community Center, where I spent a lot of time anyway. And
where did you grow up?
Where I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Okay. Yeah. And the folk rock teacher that I was studying with moved away or moved on to somewhere else. And I got transferred to a classical guitar teacher. And he was wise enough to continue teaching me to play rock music, but also taught me to read notes, and slowly developing some technique and some ability on the guitar, and having some classical guitar technique makes this rock tunes really pretty easy. And then along came classical gas. Do you know that too?
Oh yes.
And
do 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 do.
Yeah. Etc. And so that just caused me to just fall in love with the guitar and the sound of the classical guitar, as it probably did for a lot of players at the time.
Right.
And all I could think was, I just want to learn more of this classical guitar music, because the sound was just so beautiful to me. And so I continued from there. I learned, of course, every guitar player has to play the Bach Beret. Etc. And then lots and lots and lots of pieces later. Albani's, of course. This was always a big hit with audiences to this day. And all of that came from The Who, It all started with that, etc. So I usually hide my rock background, but don't tell anybody.
Were you a music major in college?
Yes. So actually, my college career started out in engineering school at the University of Pittsburgh. Yeah. And I discovered that, all the stuff they're making us do on these DEC 10 computers, the punch cards, right? Which, you take day and night writing these programs, and it would spit out like your comma would be in the wrong place. And 4 hours later, it'd spit out like 200, 300 pages of errors. and stuff. And I'm like, I can't practice my guitar and do this at the same time. This is ridiculous. So in my second semester, I auditioned to go to Carnegie Mellon for music, for guitar. And I got accepted, and I left engineering. I left my engineering history behind, and I went took my life in my hands, more or less, and became a musician. And I never looked back. And after that time period, I graduated and packed my car in Pittsburgh and traveled the country looking for a place to live and work that, where a guitar player stands a chance of being able to make some kind of living. And I went, and I wanted warmer weather too. I hated the cold at the time. So I went south and I went west. And at that time, 1986, I opened the yellow pages to see what possibilities there were for a young aspiring classical guitar player. And I ended up taking up some basic teaching work here in Houston, Texas. And I established myself in some teaching positions and some small shops here and there and so forth. And after a while, I got an early job with Houston Community College teaching for them. And then I taught for several years for Houston Baptist University and later Lamar University. And then, summer festivals at University of Houston and so forth. And then probably one of the biggest breaks that I think I've had here, and I've had many, and it's been a wonderful journey here.
Mm-hmm.
The Houston Ballet called me, and they had this Andean piece that they were playing by a group called Inti Illimani. Had guitar in it and the charango, which is an 8-string instrument made out of the shell of an armadillo, and lots of flamenco technique. And they asked me, do you know anybody that could play this thing? And I said, well, there's one guy here in town, Val Phoenix. He's a flamenco guitar player. I think you should call him. And so they did. And so I ended up playing these Andean guitar parts that were beautiful. And I fell in love with his music. There are panpipes and the kano, which is like a recorder, and percussion. And I'd never heard anything like that where I grew up or anywhere else. Mm-hmm. And I fell in love with his music. And then I ended up on tour with Houston Ballet. And within 4 or 5 years of arriving here in town, I was playing in Wortham Theater. We went to the Kennedy Center. We went to Canada. I really felt like I had it made, and it is for musicians, you're only as good as your last gig, so essentially you got to keep pushing for more and that's what I did. But probably of the ballet, symphony and opera, the most that's hired me has been the ballet, and I've worked with the symphony and the opera after that as well, and sometimes as a soloist on stage. Wonderful, wonderful experiences, just great. And later the Houston Chamber Choir and lots of other choirs in town. Christmas time seems like a big time to use guitar and choir. Yeah. I mean, not just strumming along, but serious classical guitar parts, and some nice music. And I think some part of me wanted to put down roots somewhere, and Houston's been a good place to do that for me.
It's a great music city.
Yes, absolutely. I'm always telling my friends about this that live in other places about Houston's art scene and music scene. And, this is a great place to be as a musician. And I'm pleased. And I've always had students here from the get-go. I've always had private students, and whether I was teaching for an organization or contracting for a festival or something like that. And it's just been wonderfully supportive, and I'm grateful for every part of it. Yeah.
I want to ask you, Marc, about what's behind you on the top shelf.
Sure.
Which
yeah.
I thought before we started, I thought it was a lute, but it's not.
Mm-hmm.
It's an oud.
An oud, Right, right. You know, when my students come over, I tell them that that's the great, 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 great grandfather of the guitar. You know, first it started out, there's no frets on that thing. And they eventually put frets on it. It became oud or lute. And
Okay.
yeah. And then combined with a few other instruments along the way, the tar was a very early version of the guitar. And then combined with a bunch of other versions, we've come up with our modern guitar at this point. But
the oud comes from the Middle East.
Yeah, mostly
That's
Turkey.
where Turkey.
Yeah.
And what's the what almost looks like a model guitar?
Now,
a couple of shelves below it.
Yeah, that is a guitarlele. And the reason I have that, it's tuned about a fourth higher than a guitar. Yeah, it's
guitarlele sounds like ukulele.
Yeah, it's what I love about this is it sounds like a ukulele, but it's got 6 strings and plays like a guitar, like a tiny guitar. Yeah, and yeah. So anyway, I got a performance playing for the Final Fantasy.
The video game music.
The video game. That's right. Yes. Right. And the composer writes for strings and guitar and a variety of instruments. And but there's
it's Japanese.
It's Japanese. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And Arnie Roth conducts. He and I know of him somewhat because he was connected to Mason Williams, who wrote Classical Gas and was involved in the original recording of Classical Gas. So when we first did this, I asked him about it. Yeah, you know, I played in the orchestra. He was a violinist, and in 1969, he played in that original recording. And so it's a nice connection with each other. And he tours the Final Fantasy music. And I've done it with the Houston Symphony a couple times, and then once at Rice with it might have been a few symphony players and a few other local players around town. And that was this ukulele part, and they said, Mark, you know, I mean, we need the guitar player to play the ukulele. I'm like, oh my God, it's tuned, it's tuned like a violin, I think, and all this other stuff. So I walk into a music store and I said, you know, I think I need a ukulele, but if I could get something closer to a guitar, I'd be happier. And the salesman said, you're gonna love this. It's a guitarele. And so I was able to work it out, and it felt familiar, and so it was just great. I'm always interested in the latest. Well, I can't say the latest. The right classical guitar for me. So right now, I have 2 concert guitars that are concert worthy. One is a spruce top that I played with the Houston Chamber Choir in this recording coming up. And the spruce top gives you a little bit of a brighter sound. And so I figured it'd stand out a little better over the choir than the cedar top, which is a warmer, darker sound to it. And
what's the difference between when you say a cedar top and a spruce top? What is the top that we're referring to?
Oh, the top of the guitar. The actual face of the guitar. So when you're using spruce wood, it's a tighter grain, and it has and produces a brighter sound to it. And they tend to be a little bit more well balanced. Now, they're great for playing, say, Bach or Scarlatti and then lots of things, but it gives you more of that classical balance. Whereas the cedar top gives you a warmer tone that gives you more of a Spanish sound, that warm, gutsy oomph that is in there. And that helps. So I ultimately, About a year and a half ago, I went to LA to search for a guitar. I decided that I wanted a guitar that would fit my hands just right, that was super comfortable for the size of my hand. It's not like I don't have like super long fingers. So I wanted the right neck for to be able to be comfortable to play. And then secondarily, it had to sound great.
Yeah.
But I've always had these great sounding guitars fall into my lap by kinds of odd circumstances and stuff, but never have been super comfortable. So I decided, I'm going to go to a place where I can play a zillion guitars and just try out a bunch of different shapes and so forth. So I ended up buying a Canadian Canadian-made guitar by a guy named Daryl Perry. That's the spruce top. But at the same time, I also played an Australian guitar by a guy named Richard Howe. But it was well played to death. And I loved the way it felt, but somebody had loved that guitar to death. So when I came home, I called the maker and I said, you know what, I played one of your guitars recently. Can you make me a guitar just like that one? And she said, of course. And a year later, I got the guitar. And the rest is history.
So what is it that you look for in a guitar? Or do you look for different things in different instruments?
Yes. Number one is that comfort factor, and that's different for every player. Then secondarily is it's got to sound really great. And so you listen to all the tones along the instrument, every note, and make sure that they sustain, make sure that they articulate well. There's no real dead sounds outside of old strings. That's always a little tricky. Make sure the harmonics come out. The fundamentals, of course, it has to tune right, meaning the intonation, that it can't be wonky, like that you get to the point where if it's not built right, it will never tune right. That should be a minimum component, and so most good makers will. These days there's all kinds of modern variations in guitars. There's something called the double top, which they take two tops and they glue them together, and it makes a much louder guitar. And ever since guitars have been around, makers have been trying to figure out how to make them louder to keep up with things like the Houston Chamber Choir. Now, if you want really good volume and really good tone, then you've got to bring up the price considerably to get up to that type of higher level. But at a slightly more affordable level, then you can find some makers that have guitars that have pretty good volume and excellent tone. And in my case, I'm interested in tone first in that area, then volume. And so that's fine. And then you look at, let's look at the bindings, meaning where the neck is connected to the body of the guitar. Does it look like there's, holes, or meaning that there's little spaces and that it's glued well together and so on and so forth. And that the bridge looks right. It's not coming up at the bottom and depending on, and there's nothing wrong with buying actually a used guitar, which, I did in one case, and then I bought a brand new one. There's risks in both cases. You buy a new one, you don't know if it's not been played. So you're the first one playing it. So, you got to trust that it's going to work out. And buying a used one allows you to already know what it's going to sound like for a while.
Are guitars like violins, for example? I mean, like the older the guitar, the better. Talking like a Stradivarius violin. They're hundreds of years old and they're prized. Yeah. Does it work that way for guitars?
Yes and no. It depends on who built it. Our Stradivarius of the guitar is Torres, was a Spanish maker. He was building in about the mid 1800s. And he designed the first modern classical guitar. The first bracing system, the fan bracing, which is what's inside the top of the guitar. It looks like a fan, more or less, and shapes out like that. And I got to play one when I went to Los Angeles. The salesperson said, I just happen to have a Torres in the back that's here on a repair. Would you like to play it? And of course, I'd like to play it. It's a $400,000 instrument. Yeah.
Kidding.
No.
Don't leave that in the taxi.
No. No. And I got to tell you, it was a great experience. There's a recording of me on YouTube playing it. I was nervous.
Oh, really?
I was nervous playing that. I was nervous just holding it. So violins are in a Stradivarius is in a different league than that. So that's about as far as I know of that a guitar will go. And it was a great instrument. It was great. It was just tremendous. So there's, a handful of them. So there's a lot of modern builders that are building great guitars. And I'd say, this is my opinion, maybe somebody else will give you a different opinion, but generally a modern classical guitar has about a 25-year lifespan, meaning at its peak, and then it starts coming off of its peak after that. It can still be played for years and years after that, but it sort of tops out in its best sound and then seems to go to the side. Unless, of course, it was Torres and of all things, that guitar was cracked and was there for a repair on a previous repair that was done around 1900 when it cracked. And I learned that they often do crack, but it's repairable. So for some people, why would I buy a cracked guitar for $400,000? So anyway, but people do. So yeah.
I think it's interesting for people who aren't guitarists to realize that you would think, without thinking about it, that all guitars are made to sort of the same shape, that the neck is the same thickness, that the body has the same contours. And what you are telling us is that's not the case, that there are these variations that can give you a wildly different guitar.
Yeah. I'll tell you something. My wife is connected to guitar builders in her family. And and this is one of the things that bound us together when we first met. And so I've gotten to visit with some spectacular guitar builders. She's from Portland, and Portland is the city of guitar builders.
Which is Portland, Oregon.
Portland, Oregon. Yeah.
Right.
And so when we travel there, we visit with usually about 4 different guitar builders, and they've taken me into their shops, and I've gotten to learn all about this. So if you were talking to a guitar builder here, they would say, of course, they would get it down to the millimeter about what's different about the shape of this guitar and the shape of this neck, and why this neck might work better for one guitar player and why this neck may work better for another. And one of them, his name is Jeff Elliott, who I just love this guy. He's spectacular. A couple of his guitars are in the Smithsonian, and he was up to a 25-year wait list at one point. In other words, you order your guitar, and 24 years
25
later,
years?
Yes, he calls you up and he says, I'm getting ready to build your guitar, and so let's go over those specifications again. Let's fix it. And he can tell you about the cellular level of the wood and what's going on while he's aging that wood over 10 years at a time and buying wood and so on and so forth, and how that the glue was made so that you could connect the neck to the body. And I've learned a lot from him and some of the other builders there about what exactly makes this guitar different than this guitar. And I actually gave him an example of, I happened to have I call it my beater guitar that was in the car at the time. It was something that you travel with. Okay. So that's, as he said, is insurance for your good guitar. So if you need to go somewhere and you're traveling somewhere and you need to practice, you take your beater guitar with you. You're not performing with it, but you're practicing with it. It's fine. But you don't want to worry about taking on a plane, which is a whole other hassle with a guitar and so on and so forth. But got to perform. Yeah, that's a whole other ball game. You take your super case and your super guitar and so on and so forth. But if you're going to practice, so I brought it in and we compared. Well, what has to happen to get it from this level to this level? And he laid that whole thing out, and it was down to how you age that wood. Like, how long is the builder willing to age the wood? How is he picking it out? He's going to tap on that top, and then he's going to check the sound of it and tuning it more or less. What they call tuning it is just checking for tone. And he might shave some elements of it down and then check it again and then let it sit for months. And then he starts adding bracing systems, which reflect and absorb certain sounds of the guitar. And each maker has their own secrets behind their bracing systems and the glue they use that they make to put the braces in there and so on and so forth. I mean, you need strength, but you also need tone and so on and so forth.
Within the classical guitar repertoire and community, is there the debate between gut strings and nylon strings, as there would be for a violinist, for example? I mean, I know steel strings are out, but
right. Gut strings were used on classical guitars as a whole, and then nylon came along. When I was growing up, I had nylon strings. I never had gut strings, in the 70s. So, so I know, that's a bigger issue, in other words. But today's issue is there's all these different, so there's typically nylon core string and then metal wrapped around the bases. And then the trebles, the top three, are basically a type of a plastic that is like fishing line.
Right.
But string companies would get bent out of shape if they heard me say that, because they make sure that width is just right and so on and so forth. Right. But now there's all these variations of nylon. There's carbon, metal. There's a whole variety of composite strings that they're using. Bronze, they're using this, that, all kinds of different variations. And I've tried a bunch of different ones, and every 4 years or so, I'll switch off and to something different. And but they're basically nylon strings, some variation of nylon strings, more what we call nylon strings. Yeah.
Well, we mentioned at the beginning of the interview about your collaboration with the Houston Chamber Choir on their upcoming program, A Time to Journey Inward, which debuts March 21st at 2 p.m. on the choir's digital stage. And James Whitbourne's piece, Solitude, which is the piece that you're performing with the choir. Which guitar did you choose for that?
That was by Darryl Perry, the spruce top guitar. So you should be able to hear that bright ping just right. Just right. Yeah. So that's the guitar. And also, a solo of mine will air a piece by Agustin Barrios Mangore called Julia Florida that will air as well for my solo.
Look, Mark, it's been fascinating to talk to you and to learn so much about the guitar and about you. And it's wonderful to see you back collaborating with the Houston Chamber Choir. Thank you for all that you bring to their performances. And we wish you all the very best. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sinjin. It's just been a pleasure to talk with you and to share music and stories about guitar and with you and the entire audience. I'm just thrilled and can't wait for our performance to air.
And I managed to get through the whole interview without mentioning that I used to play the guitar.
Oh, really? Oh, no, we should
Yes,
really include this.
No, we're not going there.
Oh, classical or pop or what?
Yeah, a little bit of both. But that was a long, long time ago. But thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Sure, you're welcome. Come take some lessons. You should start doing it again.
Yes. And thank you to everybody who supports the Houston Chamber Choir as a sponsor, as a patron, as an audience member. We really appreciate all that you do for the choir. And we look forward to seeing you next time on Behind the Music. I'm Sinjin Flynn. Thank you for joining us.
The Houston Chamber Choirs with One Accord is your one-stop shop for choral joy. If you enjoyed this podcast, help us to continue our mission to grow the esteem and appreciation of choral music by sharing, reviewing, and subscribing to our content. As a 501c3 nonprofit, support from listeners like you allows us to continue making new and exciting programming. For more information about us and how you can support our work, please visit HoustonChamberChoir.org/give.